I never thought a piece of land my grandfather bought in 1967 would become the source of the biggest neighborhood war in Scottsdale, Arizona history. But here we are. The whole thing started on a Saturday morning in late March when I was sitting on my back deck, drinking coffee and watching the ducks paddle around the retention pond that bordered my property. That's when I saw her marching across the water's edge with a clipboard, a measuring tape, and the kind of determined expression that screamed trouble. Her name was Patricia Caldwell, and she was the newly elected president of the Saguaro Heights HOA. I'd lived in this house for 3 years ever since my divorce, and I'd managed to avoid most of the HOA drama by keeping my lawn trim and my trash cans out of sight. But Patricia had other plans for me, apparently. "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "Are you the owner of this property?" I set down my coffee and walked to the edge of my deck. "That would be me, William Reeves. Can I help you with something?" She adjusted her oversized sunglasses and consulted her clipboard. "I'm Patricia Caldwell, HOA president. I'm conducting an inspection of the retention pond, and I need to inform you that several violations have been noted." "Violations?" I descended the steps slowly, curious now. What kind of violations? For starters, there's excessive vegetation along the shoreline, which is creating a mosquito breeding ground. The duck population is also out of control, and their droppings are creating an unsanitary condition. As per HOA Regulations Section 12.4, all common areas must be maintained to community standards. I crossed my arms and leaned against the deck railing. "That's interesting, Patricia, but I've got some news for you. This isn't a common area." Her perfectly penciled eyebrows shot up. "Excuse me, the retention pond. It's not HOA property, it's mine." The color drained from her face, then rushed back twice as red. "That's absolutely ridiculous. This pond services the entire Saguaro Heights development. It's clearly common property." "Actually, it's not. My grandfather, Harold Reeves, owned this entire parcel before the development went in. When Pinnacle Homes bought the surrounding land in 1998 to build the subdivision, my grandfather sold them everything except this 5-acre plot and the retention pond. He kept it specifically because he loved fishing here." Patricia's mouth opened and closed like one of the bass in the pond. "That can't be legal." "It's perfectly legal. I've got the deed, the survey maps, and all the documentation. The pond is entirely on my property. The HOA has an easement to use it for drainage, but that's it. They don't own it and they don't control it." She straightened her spine, clearly regrouping. "Well, I'll need to see those documents. This is highly irregular. I'll bet it is. Tell you what, I'll email them to you this afternoon. What's your address?" Patricia gave me her information with a stiff smile that didn't reach her eyes, then marched back toward the community without another word. I watched her go, wondering if I should have kept my mouth shut. But property rights were property rights, and I'd be damned if I was going to let some overzealous HOA president steamroll me. The email I sent that afternoon included scanned copies of the original deed from 1967, the updated deed transfer when my grandfather passed away in 2019, and the subdivision plat map clearly showing the pond boundaries within my property lines. I also included the drainage easement agreement, which specified that the HOA had the right to use the pond for stormwater management, but no other rights whatsoever. I didn't hear anything for 3 days. Then my phone rang at 7 in the morning on a Wednesday. "This is William." "Mr. Reeves, this is Gordon Foster, HOA legal counsel for Saguaro Heights. I've reviewed the documents you sent to Mrs. Caldwell, and while they appear to be in order, we have some concerns about the maintenance and access issues." I poured myself a fresh cup of coffee and settled into my kitchen chair. "What kind of concerns?" "The pond serves a vital function for the community's drainage system. If it's not properly maintained, it could create flooding issues for the entire subdivision. We need assurance that you're going to maintain it according to county standards." "I've maintained it just fine for 3 years, and my grandfather maintained it for 20 years before that. There haven't been any flooding issues. Nevertheless, the HOA board feels that some formal agreement should be in place. We'd like to schedule a meeting to discuss the matter." I could have refused, but curiosity got the better of me. "Fine. When?" "Thursday evening at 7. The community center." Thursday came around faster than I expected. The Saguaro Heights Community Center was a sprawling building with beige stucco walls and a red tile roof fitting perfectly into the Arizona aesthetic. Inside, the main meeting room was already packed with about 30 people, most of whom I recognized from around the neighborhood but had never actually spoken to. Patricia sat at the head table with 4 other board members and Gordon Foster, a balding man in his 50s wearing a suit that probably cost more than my truck. I took a seat near the back and waited. "Thank you all for coming," Patricia began, her voice amplified by a small microphone. "We have an unusual situation that requires community input. As many of you know, the retention pond that serves our drainage needs is actually on private property owned by Mr. William Reeves." She gestured toward me, and 30 heads swiveled in my direction. While Mr. Reeves has graciously allowed the community to use the pond for drainage purposes, we have concerns about maintenance and long-term access. A woman in the front row raised her hand. I don't understand. How can the pond be private property? We all use it, actually. You don't use it, I called out from the back. Your storm drains empty into it, which is covered by the easement. But nobody uses it for anything else. People walk around it all the time, another voice chimed in. The kids feed the ducks. I've never had a problem with that, I said, standing up so people could hear me better. But legally you're all trespassing when you do. I've never enforced it because I didn't care. But that could change. The room erupted in murmurs. Patricia banged a gavel that seemed excessive for a simple meeting. Order, please, Mr. Foster. Perhaps you could explain the legal situation. Gordon stood and adjusted his glasses. Simply put, Mr. Reeves owns the property and the HOA has a drainage easement. That easement doesn't include recreational access. If Mr. Reeves chose to restrict access, he would be within his legal rights. But that's insane, a man in a golf shirt protested. My kids have been going to that pond since we moved here 5 years ago. It's a community amenity. It's actually not, Gordon said patiently. It's private property that the community has been using with the owner's tacit permission. Patricia leaned forward into her microphone. Which brings us to tonight's proposal. The HOA board would like to negotiate with Mr. Reeves to purchase the pond and surrounding property, bringing it fully under HOA control. Now that was interesting. I waited for her to continue. We're prepared to offer fair market value for the property, which would ensure that the community maintains access and that proper maintenance standards are upheld. I stood again. How much are we talking about? Patricia consulted a paper in front of her. Based on comparable land sales in the area, we're prepared to offer $75,000. I actually laughed. You're joking, right? 5 acres of prime land with water features in Scottsdale? That's worth at least $400,000, probably more. The room went silent. Gordon leaned over to whisper something to Patricia, whose face was turning an impressive shade of crimson. That's completely unreasonable, she said. The HO doesn't have that kind of money in reserve. Then I guess the pond stays mine. I grabbed my jacket from the back of the chair. Look, I don't want to cause problems. I'm happy to maintain the pond and keep letting people enjoy it, as long as everyone's respectful. But I'm not selling my property for a fraction of its value just to make your administrative life easier. What about a lease agreement? Gordon suggested quickly. The HOA could lease the property from you for a nominal fee, giving us formal access rights while you retain ownership. Define nominal, $1 a year, no thanks. If you want formal access, the fee is $5,000 a year, indexed to inflation. Patricia stood so fast her chair scraped across the floor. $5,000? That's extortion, that's business. You want guaranteed access to my property for HOA events, walking trails, duck feeding, whatever else you have planned. That's the price. Otherwise, things stay exactly as they are now, informal and at my discretion. I left before anyone could respond. The murmuring behind me crescendoed into full arguments as I pushed through the door into the warm Arizona evening. For a few weeks, everything went quiet. I figured Patricia had decided to drop the whole thing and move on to harassing other homeowners about their mailbox colors or whatever HOA presidents did with their time. But I should have known better. The first sign of trouble came on a Monday morning when I left for work and found a notice taped to my front door. It was an official HOA violation citation, claiming that my house had multiple infractions: peeling paint on the garage door, a cracked driveway, and landscaping that didn't meet community standards. I examined my garage door, which I'd repainted 6 months ago. There wasn't a single spot of peeling paint. My driveway had one tiny crack that had been there when I bought the house. And my landscaping was desert-appropriate xeriscaping with native plants and rocks, exactly like half the other houses in the neighborhood. The citation gave me 10 days to remedy the violations or face fines of $100 per day. I took photos of everything, documenting the pristine condition of my property, and drafted a response email to Patricia explaining that the violations were either non-existent or petty beyond reason. I sent it off and tried to focus on work, but I could feel the situation escalating. 3 days later, another notice appeared. This one claimed my trash cans were visible from the street. They weren't, and that I was parking a commercial vehicle in my driveway, which violated community standards. The commercial vehicle in question was my personal truck with my company's magnetic sign on the door. I removed the sign whenever I parked at home, but apparently Patricia had caught me one evening when I'd forgotten. This is harassment. I told my neighbor Dave Martinez over beers on his patio that weekend. She's retaliating because I wouldn't sell her the pond. Dave nodded sympathetically. He was a mechanical engineer who'd lived in Saguaro Heights for a decade and had his own battles with previous HOA boards. Patricia's got a reputation. She ran for president on a platform of restoring community standards, which basically means she wants to fine everyone into submission. You're just her biggest target right now. What do I do? Document everything, fight every violation, and whatever you do, don't let her bully you into selling that property for less than it's worth. She's trying to make your life miserable so you'll cave. He was right, of course. But knowing you're being bullied and stopping it are two different things. The violations kept coming, one per week, like clockwork. My basketball hoop was too close to the street. My outdoor light fixture didn't match the approved style. My front door wreath was hanging outside the designated holiday decoration period. Each violation came with the same threat: fix it in 10 days or face daily fines. I fought every single one. I submitted photos, measurements, and citations from the HOA's own rulebook showing that I was in compliance. Gordon Foster, to his credit, sided with me more often than not, overturning most of Patricia's bogus violations. But the harassment was taking its toll. I was spending hours every week documenting and disputing citations instead of living my life. Then Patricia changed tactics. In mid-May, I came home to find wooden stakes with orange tape surrounding the retention pond. A survey crew was packing up their equipment near the water's edge. "What the hell is going on?" I demanded, striding across my lawn. The crew chief, a weathered guy in his 50s, held up his hands. "Just doing a job, man. The HOA hired us to survey the pond boundaries. Did they tell you this is private property?" His expression shifted. No. They said it was community property and they were updating their maps." "It's not community property, it's mine. I need you to leave." The crew chief looked uncomfortable but started gathering his gear faster. "Look, we don't want any trouble. We'll let the HOA know there's a dispute." After they left, I called Gordon Foster directly. His secretary put me through after I explained it was urgent. "Mr. Reeves, I apologize for the confusion. Mrs. Caldwell commissioned that survey without board approval. It won't happen again. Gordon, this is getting out of control. She's harassing me, making false violation claims, and now sending survey crews onto my property without permission. I'm about 2 seconds away from calling a lawyer and filing a restraining order." There was a long pause. "Let me talk to the board. Give me a few days to sort this out." I agreed, but I didn't have much faith that talking would solve anything. Patricia had made this personal, and she didn't strike me as someone who backed down easily. The board meeting must have gone badly, because 2 days later I received a certified letter informing me that the HOA was filing a lawsuit challenging my ownership of the retention pond. The letter claimed that the drainage easement constituted sufficient community interest to override private property rights, and that the pond should be declared a community asset through adverse possession and public necessity. That's when I called my lawyer. Marcus Webb was a property attorney I'd used during my divorce, and he was one of the few people I trusted completely. His office was in downtown Scottsdale, and I met him there on a Friday afternoon. "They're claiming adverse possession?" Marcus said, reading through the HOA's complaint. "That's interesting." "Interesting how? Adverse possession requires open, notorious, continuous, and hostile use of property for a specific period. In Arizona, it's 10 years. But you've owned this property for less than 7 years, and your grandfather owned it before that. There's no way they can claim continuous adverse possession when the rightful owner has been present the whole time. So it's a garbage lawsuit. Completely. But that doesn't mean it won't cost you time and money to fight, which is probably what they're counting on. Can we countersue?" Marcus leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "We could. Harassment, abusive process, possibly even defamation depending on what they're saying in HOA meetings. But that escalates things significantly. Things are already escalated. She's making my life hell, Marcus. I need this to stop, then let's make it stop. I'll file a response to their lawsuit and include a counterclaim for harassment and abusive process. I'll also draft a cease and desist letter regarding the violation notices. If they continue after that, we'll have grounds for an injunction. Do it." Marcus got to work, and for the first time in weeks I felt like I had some control over the situation. But Patricia wasn't done yet. The next phase of her campaign started with social media. Someone created a Facebook group called Saguaro Heights Community Concerns and started posting about the retention pond situation. The posts painted me as a selfish property owner who was putting the entire community at risk by refusing to allow proper maintenance of essential drainage infrastructure. "William Reeves is holding our neighborhood hostage over a pond," one post read. "What happens when monsoon season hits and the drainage system fails because he won't let the HOA do necessary work? Our homes could flood." Another post claimed I was planning to fill in the pond and build rental properties on the land, destroying the community's character and property values. Never mind that none of this was true, the damage was done. Neighbors who'd previously been friendly started giving me cold shoulders at the grocery store. Someone left a nasty note on my windshield calling me a greedy jerk. I didn't engage with the social media stuff. Marcus advised against it, saying anything I posted could be used against me in the lawsuit. But staying silent felt like letting Patricia control the narrative. Then things got worse. On a Tuesday evening in late May, right as monsoon season was starting to ramp up, I heard banging coming from the direction of the pond. I walked out back with a flashlight and found a construction crew installing a chain-link fence around the water's edge. "Stop!" I shouted, breaking into a run. "What are you doing?" A foreman in a hard hat turned to me. "Installing a safety fence per HOA order. We've got the work order right here. This is private property. You're trespassing. I need you to leave immediately." The foreman looked confused and called someone on his cell phone. After a brief conversation, he handed me the phone. Patricia's voice came through, sickeningly sweet. "Mr. Reeves, the HOA board determined that the pond presents a safety hazard, particularly for children. We're required by our insurance carrier to install protective fencing around any body of water in the community. It's not in the community, it's on my property. And if you don't get this crew off my land in the next 5 minutes, I'm calling the police." "You wouldn't dare." "Try me." I hung up and dialed 911. The Scottsdale Police Department sent an officer within 10 minutes. By the time he arrived, the construction crew had already packed up and left, but they'd managed to install about 50 feet of fencing along the south edge of the pond. Officer Raymond Shepard was a calm, professional guy in his early 30s. He took my statement and examined the partially installed fence. "Do you want to press charges for trespassing?" "I want a police report documenting this incident. I've got an active lawsuit with the HOA, and this is part of a pattern of harassment." "I'll file the report. As for the fence, that's a civil matter. You'll need to work it out with your lawyer." After Officer Shepard left, I called Marcus. Despite it being almost 9 at night, he answered. "They did what?" he said after I explained. "Sent a construction crew onto my property to install a fence without my permission. That's trespassing, destruction of property, and possibly criminal conspiracy." "Did you get a police report?" "Yes." "Good. Forward me a copy as soon as you get it. This changes things, William. They've crossed a line." Marcus filed an emergency motion the next morning requesting a temporary restraining order against the HOA, prohibiting them from entering my property or conducting any work without my explicit written permission. The judge granted it within 24 hours. I thought that would be the end of it. I was wrong. Patricia's next move was to call a special HOA meeting to vote on a special assessment, a one-time fee charged to all homeowners to fund the purchase of the retention pond through eminent domain. The notice went out to all 215 homes in Saguaro Heights, claiming that the pond was essential infrastructure and that the community needed to take control to ensure public safety. The special assessment was set at $2,000 per household. My mailbox exploded with angry letters. Neighbors who'd been on the fence about the whole situation were now furious that they were being asked to pay $2,000 because of my stubbornness. Never mind that the HOA had no legal grounds for eminent domain. Private HOAs can't seize property like government entities can. But most people didn't know that the vote was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon in early June. I showed up with Marcus, ready for a fight. The community center was absolutely packed. Every seat was filled and people lined the walls. The energy in the room was angry and volatile. Patricia stood at the front with the other board members, looking grimmer than usual. "Thank you all for coming," she began. "Today we're voting on a special assessment to fund the acquisition of the retention pond property from Mr. Reeves. As you all know, this property is essential to our community's infrastructure, and Mr. Reeves has refused to negotiate in good faith." I stood up. "That's a lie. I offered to lease the property for $5,000 a year, which is well below market rate. The HOA refused." $5,000 a year is extortion," Patricia shot back. "This community shouldn't have to pay rental fees for essential infrastructure." Marcus stood beside me. "For the record, I'm Marcus Webb, Mr. Reeves's attorney. The HOA has no legal authority to exercise eminent domain. Private homeowners associations are not government entities. This special assessment is collecting money for something the HOA legally cannot do." Gordon Foster looked distinctly uncomfortable at the head table. "Mrs. Caldwell, perhaps we should table this vote until we've explored all legal options." "We're exploring our options right now," Patricia snapped. "The community deserves a voice." A woman in her 60s raised her hand. "I don't understand why we're being charged $2,000 because you can't work out an agreement with Mr. Reeves. This seems like something the board should handle without dipping into our pockets." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. A younger guy in a Suns jersey stood up. "Yeah, and if the HOA can't legally take the property anyway, what are we paying for?" Patricia's face was turning red again. "We're paying for legal fees to challenge Mr. Reeves's questionable ownership claim." "My ownership isn't questionable," I called out. "I've provided documented proof of ownership going back to 1967. The HOA's lawsuit is frivolous, and your attorney knows it." I looked directly at Gordon, who wouldn't meet my eyes. The meeting devolved into chaos. People shouted questions and accusations. Some directed their anger at me, others at Patricia. Eventually, Gordon called for a vote on the special assessment. It failed spectacularly. Only 42 people voted in favor, while over 100 voted against. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. She adjourned the meeting abruptly and disappeared into a back office. As people filed out, several neighbors approached me apologetically. "I'm sorry about all this," Dave Martinez said. "Most of us just want this whole thing to go away." "So do I replied honestly. "I never wanted a war. I just wanted to keep my property." An older woman named Helen touched my arm gently. "My husband and I have been feeding the ducks at that pond for 8 years. You've never once complained or told us to leave. We appreciate that, and we don't think you're the villain here." Those small moments of support meant more than I could express. But Patricia wasn't finished. Not by a long shot. 2 weeks after the failed special assessment vote, I woke up to find the retention pond completely drained. Not partially drained, completely empty. The muddy bottom was exposed, and fish flopped desperately in small puddles. The ducks were gone, probably having fled when their habitat disappeared overnight. I called the police immediately, then Marcus, then the Arizona Game and Fish Department, because killing fish through habitat destruction seemed like it had to be some kind of crime. Officer Shepard returned, this time with a detective named Laura Mitchell. They examined the scene while I tried to explain what had happened. "The pond's fed by natural groundwater and stormwater runoff," I explained. "The only way it could drain this fast is if someone opened the outflow valve." Detective Mitchell found the valve at the edge of the property, near where the HOA's drainage easement connected. It was standing wide open. "Who has access to this valve?" she asked. "Technically, the HOA, because it's part of the drainage system. But they're not supposed to touch it without my permission, especially not after the restraining order." Detective Mitchell took photos and measurements. "I'll need to interview the HOA board members. This could be vandalism, destruction of property, and possibly animal cruelty depending on how many fish died." The Arizona Game and Fish officer, a stern woman named Janet Kowalski, counted at least 40 dead fish in the exposed mud. "This is a violation of state wildlife regulations," she said. "Whoever did this is looking at significant fines." Marcus arrived an hour later and surveyed the damage with a grim expression. "This is escalating beyond a civil dispute. If the HOA board is behind this, they're looking at criminal charges. Who else could it be? That's for the police to determine, but this helps our case immensely. No judge is going to look favorably on an HOA that's actively destroying the property they claim to want to protect." The investigation moved quickly. Detective Mitchell interviewed Patricia and the other board members that same day. According to Dave, who heard it through the neighborhood gossip network, Patricia denied everything. She claimed the valve must have been opened by vandals or possibly by me to make the HOA look bad. But then security footage surfaced. The HOA had installed cameras at the community center parking lot 6 months earlier, and one of those cameras had a partial view of the area near the retention pond. The footage showed Patricia and another board member, a guy named Kenneth Drummond, walking to the valve area at 2 in the morning. They were visible for less than 30 seconds before the angle cut them off. But it was enough. Detective Mitchell arrested Patricia and Kenneth the following Tuesday on charges of criminal trespassing, vandalism, and destruction of property. Kenneth immediately cooperated, giving a statement that Patricia had ordered him to open the valve and that she'd told him it was legal because the drainage system was HOA property. Patricia hired a criminal defense attorney and refused to talk to the police without counsel present. The HOA board held an emergency meeting and voted to remove Patricia as president. Gordon Foster announced that the HOA was dropping its lawsuit against me and would cover my legal fees as part of a settlement agreement. I should have felt victorious, but mostly I just felt tired. My retention pond was destroyed, the fish were dead, and the ducks hadn't returned. The entire situation had spiraled so far out of control that criminal charges were now involved. Marcus negotiated a settlement with the HOA that included $15,000 for restoration of the pond, full reimbursement of my legal fees, and a formal apology to be published in the community newsletter. The HOA also agreed to acknowledge my property rights in writing and to never challenge my ownership again. I used the settlement money to hire an ecological restoration company. They refilled the pond, restocked it with fish, and planted native vegetation around the edges to stabilize the shoreline. Within 3 weeks, the ducks started coming back. Patricia's criminal case dragged on through the summer. Her attorney tried to get the charges reduced, arguing that she believed she had legal authority to access the drainage valve. The prosecutor wasn't buying it, especially given the restraining order that explicitly prohibited the HOA from entering my property. In September, Patricia pleaded guilty to reduced charges of criminal trespassing and vandalism. She was sentenced to 200 hours of community service, 3 years of probation, and ordered to pay restitution for the dead fish, a fine that went to the Arizona Game and Fish Department's Conservation Fund. Kenneth got a lighter sentence because he'd cooperated, but he was also banned from serving on any HOA board in Arizona for 5 years. The whole ordeal taught me some valuable lessons about property rights, HOA politics, and the lengths some people will go to when they feel entitled to control something. But it also showed me that most people are reasonable when given accurate information. The majority of my neighbors didn't support Patricia's crusade once they understood what was really happening. On a cool November evening, after everything had finally settled down, I decided to put up a sign. Not to be spiteful, but to make things clear for everyone moving forward. The sign was simple: private property, no trespassing, violators will be prosecuted. But underneath, in smaller letters, I added, respectful visitors welcome for fishing and duck feeding, please leave no trace. Dave came over that evening with a 6-pack of beer, and we sat on my deck watching the sunset reflect off the pond's surface. The ducks were paddling around contentedly, and I could see a couple of kids from the neighborhood at the far edge, tossing breadcrumbs into the water. You think Patricia learned anything from all this? Dave asked. Probably not, I said. People like her don't usually learn. They just move on to the next battle. Well, at least she won't be fighting it here. The new HOA board is actually pretty reasonable. They voted to revise a bunch of the more ridiculous rules. That's something, I guess. We drank our beers in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn from orange to purple. The whole nightmare had lasted nearly 6 months, cost me thousands of dollars in legal fees despite the settlement, and aged me in ways I didn't want to think about. But I still had my property. The retention pond was still mine, restored and beautiful. And the principle of the thing that property rights matter, that bullies don't get to win just because they have a clipboard and a title, had been upheld. The new HOA president, a retired schoolteacher named Margaret Yates, reached out to me in December with a proposal. Instead of a lease, she suggested a formal agreement where the HOA would help maintain the pond in exchange for designated community access hours. The agreement would be purely voluntary on my part and could be terminated at any time. We're not trying to control your property, Margaret said when we met at a local coffee shop. We just want to make sure the community can continue enjoying the pond the way they have for years, and we want to help keep it beautiful. What kind of maintenance are we talking about? Seasonal cleanup? Algae control? Maybe some additional native plantings. We'd also like to install a small walking path around the perimeter if you're amenable. Everything would be done with your approval, and we'd provide all funding. It was everything Patricia's approach should have been from the start: respectful, collaborative, and focused on mutual benefit rather than control. Let me think about it, I said, though I was already leaning toward yes. Marcus reviewed the proposed agreement and made a few modifications to protect my interests. The final version specified that all work required my written approval, that the HOA would carry insurance covering any liability at the pond, and that I retained full authority to revoke access at any time without cause. Most importantly, the agreement explicitly stated that it did not constitute any claim of ownership or possessory rights by the HOA. I signed it in January, almost a full year after Patricia had first marched across my lawn with her clipboard. The walking path was completed by March, just in time for spring. It was beautiful decomposed granite surface with natural stone borders, winding gently around the pond's edge, with several benches positioned at scenic viewpoints. The HOA had done exactly what they'd promised, no more and no less, and they'd consulted with me at every stage. On the opening day of the path, Margaret organized a small community gathering. Nothing fancy, just coffee and donuts at the community center, followed by a group walk around the pond. About 70 people showed up, including several families with young children. As we walked, Helen, the woman who'd been feeding the ducks for years, fell into step beside me. "This is wonderful," she said. "Thank you for working with the new board. I know you didn't have to." "It's what should have happened from the beginning," I replied. "I never wanted to keep people away from the pond. I just wanted my property rights respected. Well, they're respected now, and the whole neighborhood is better for it." She was right. The drama and conflict of the previous year had given way to something genuinely positive. The pond became a gathering place again, but now there was a structure and understanding around it. People respected the boundaries because they knew I'd chosen to share the space, not because they felt entitled to it. Patricia's name came up occasionally in neighborhood conversations, usually in the context of what not to do as an HOA leader. I heard she moved to Nevada a few months after her conviction, probably seeking a fresh start away from the scandal. Kenneth stayed in Scottsdale but kept a very low profile. The lawsuit had been dropped, my countersuits settled, and the criminal cases resolved. All that remained was the simple reality that had been true from the beginning. I held the deed to the retention pond, and everyone had learned what that meant. On warm evenings, I'd sit on my deck with a cold drink and watch families walk the path. Kids chase butterflies through the native plants, and elderly couples sit on benches holding hands while they watch the sunset. The ducks had multiplied, and I'd spotted a blue heron fishing in the shallows one morning. The pond was thriving, the community was peaceful, and my property rights were firmly established. Dave stopped by one Friday evening in April with Chinese takeout and another six-pack. We ate on the deck, watching a family teach their young daughter how to identify different duck species. "You ever regret not just selling the pond to them for whatever they offered?" Dave asked between bites of Kung Pao chicken. I thought about it for a moment. No. If I'd caved to Patricia's bullying, it would have taught her and everyone else that harassment works. Sometimes you have to stand your ground, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard, Dave agreed. That's when it matters most. Besides, this turned out better than any sale would have. The pond stays in my family, the community gets to enjoy it, and everyone learned a valuable lesson about respecting property rights and working together. Speaking of your family, you think you'll pass this place down to your kids someday? I had 2 kids from my marriage, teenagers now, who lived with their mother in Phoenix. They visited occasionally, and both of them loved the pond. Yeah, probably. My grandfather wanted this land to stay in the family, that's why he held on to it when he sold everything else. I'd like to honor that. He'd be proud of how you handled this whole situation. I hoped so. Grandpa Harold had been a tough old guy, a veteran who'd worked construction his whole life and didn't take nonsense from anyone. But he'd also been fair and reasonable, willing to help neighbors and friends without expecting anything in return. He'd taught me that being strong didn't mean being cruel, and that standing up for yourself didn't require tearing others down. Those lessons had served me well during the darkest days of the conflict with Patricia. I'd never stooped to her level of pettiness and vindictiveness. I'd simply defended what was mine and let the legal system do its job. The Chinese food boxes were nearly empty when Margaret walked by on the path, walking a golden retriever. She waved up at us and we waved back. "New board's doing a great job," Dave observed. "The newsletter's actually interesting now, and they've stopped harassing people about ridiculous violations. It's amazing what happens when leadership focuses on community instead of control." Amen to that. We clinked our beer bottles together and settled into comfortable silence, listening to the evening sounds of the desert crickets chirping, the distant cry of a hawk, the gentle splash of ducks settling in for the night. The whole experience had changed my perspective on a lot of things. I'd learned that HOAs could be beneficial when run by reasonable people focused on genuine community interests. I'd learned that standing up to bullies was exhausting but necessary. I'd learned that most people are decent and reasonable when given accurate information and treated with respect. Most importantly, I'd learned the value of the property my grandfather had preserved for our family. It wasn't just dirt and water, it was a legacy, a connection to the past, and a gift for the future. The pond represented my grandfather's foresight and stubborn independence, qualities that had served him well and that I hoped to pass on to my own children. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky, I felt a deep sense of contentment. The battle was over, the pond was safe, the community was thriving, and that simple "no trespassing" sign with its welcoming addendum stood as a reminder that property rights and community cooperation weren't mutually exclusive, they could and should coexist. In the end, Patricia's aggressive power play had backfired spectacularly. Instead of giving her control over the retention pond, her actions had resulted in criminal charges, public embarrassment, and removal from the HOA board. Meanwhile, I'd emerged with my property rights firmly established, a good relationship with the new board, and the respect of most of my neighbors. The whole saga would probably become neighborhood legend, a cautionary tale told at community gatherings for years to come. And maybe that was a good thing. Maybe future HOA leaders would remember what happened when one president went too far, and they'd choose collaboration over confrontation. Dave finished his beer and stood to leave, gathering the empty food containers. "Same time next week?" "Absolutely. Bring Thai food this time." "You got it." After he left, I stayed on the deck for another hour, enjoying the peace and quiet. A few stars reflected on the pond's surface, creating the illusion of 2 night skies, one above and one below. The ducks had settled into their nightly routine, tucked into the reeds along the far shore. Everything was as it should be. My phone buzzed with a text from my daughter Emily. She was asking if she and her brother could come visit the following weekend, maybe do some fishing at the pond. I texted back immediately. "Absolutely. Can't wait to see you both." They'd been supportive throughout the whole ordeal, even offering to testify in court if needed. Emily had been particularly outraged on my behalf, threatening to start her own social media campaign defending me against the accusations. I'd talked her out of it, explaining that engaging with that kind of negativity wouldn't help, but I'd appreciated the fierce loyalty. The temperature was dropping as desert nights do, and I finally headed inside. Before I did, I took one last look at the retention pond, my retention pond, and the no trespassing sign posted at the trailhead. Tomorrow, kids would feed the ducks. Couples would walk the path hand in hand. Fishermen would try their luck in the early morning stillness. And all of it would happen on my property, shared willingly and joyfully with a community that had finally learned to respect what that meant. I'd held my ground when it mattered most. I'd defended my rights without becoming the villain. And in doing so, I'd created something better than what Patricia had envisioned, not an HOA-controlled asset managed by committee and regulation, but a shared community resource grounded in mutual respect and voluntary cooperation. That was the real victory. Not the legal vindication or the settlement money or even Patricia's conviction, but the proof that standing up for principles could lead to outcomes that benefited everyone. As I locked the door and turned off the porch light, I smiled to myself. Grandpa Harold would have been proud. He'd held onto this land because he knew it was special, because he understood that some things shouldn't be compromised or sold just because someone with authority demanded it. He'd passed that stubbornness down to me, and I'd proven worthy of the inheritance. The retention pond would remain in the Reeves family for another generation, and my kids would someday face their own decisions about its future. But they'd make those decisions from a position of strength, with clear property rights and documented legal precedents. They'd know the story of how their father stood up to an overreaching HOA president and won not through aggression or spite, but through patience, documentation, and the fundamental principle that property rights matter. That was the legacy I'd leave them, along with 5 acres of beautiful Arizona land and a retention pond full of ducks, fish, and possibilities. And really, what more could anyone ask for? The next morning, I woke early and made coffee as the sun rose over the Sonoran Desert. Through my kitchen window, I could see the pond turning from dark blue to brilliant turquoise as the light changed. A heron had returned, standing motionless in the shallows, waiting for breakfast to swim by. My phone rang just as I poured my second cup. It was Marcus. "Morning, William. Just wanted to give you a heads up. I received confirmation yesterday that the HOA's insurance company has issued payment for all agreed upon legal fees. The check should arrive at your address within a week. That's great news. Thanks for handling everything, Marcus." "My pleasure. This was one of the more satisfying cases I've worked on, honestly. Justice was clearly served. I couldn't have done it without you." "Sure you could have. You would have just spent more money and time. All I did was navigate the legal system. You did the hard part, standing your ground when everyone was telling you to back down." After we hung up, I took my coffee outside and walked down to the pond. The heron eyed me warily but didn't fly away, having grown accustomed to human presence. I stood at the water's edge, breathing in the cool morning air and feeling grateful for everything that had happened, even the difficult parts. Growth often comes through adversity, and this experience had certainly tested me. I'd learned patience I didn't know I had. I'd discovered a capacity for strategic thinking under pressure. I'd found out which neighbors were true friends and which were fair-weather allies. All valuable lessons, even if I'd preferred not to learn them the hard way. A jogger passed by on the walking path, waving cheerfully. I waved back, recognizing her as someone from the south section of the neighborhood. These small, friendly interactions happened constantly now, people acknowledging me as they enjoyed the pond, thanking me for sharing the space, compliments on how beautiful the restoration had turned out. It was everything an HOA should facilitate: community connection, shared enjoyment of common spaces, and mutual respect. The difference was that it had been achieved through cooperation rather than coercion, through respect for property rights rather than attempts to override them. Margaret had proven to be an excellent HOA president, thoughtful and collaborative in her approach. Under her leadership, the board had revised dozens of outdated and overly restrictive rules, making Saguaro Heights a more pleasant place to live. Violation notices had dropped by nearly 80%, not because standards had been abandoned, but because the focus had shifted from punishment to education and reasonable accommodation. The special assessment failure had also taught the board to be more careful with finances. Instead of pursuing expensive legal battles and questionable land acquisitions, they'd focused on maintaining existing amenities and slowly building reserves for future needs. It was boring, responsible governance, exactly what an HOA should be. I finished my coffee and headed back inside to get ready for work. My day job as a civil engineer felt almost mundane compared to the drama of the past year, but I was grateful for the return to normalcy. No more violation notices waiting on my door. No more hostile encounters at community meetings. No more wondering what Patricia would do next. Work that day was consumed by a drainage project for a new commercial development north of Scottsdale. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was designing retention ponds for other people, while having just fought a year-long battle over my own. But this project was straightforward, professional, lacking the emotional intensity and personal stakes that had defined the Saguaro Heights situation. When I got home that evening, I found a handwritten note tucked into my front door. It was from a family who'd recently moved into the neighborhood, thanking me for allowing access to the pond and sharing how much their kids loved feeding the ducks. The note was signed by all 4 family members, including drawings from the 2 children. I put the note on my refrigerator, right next to pictures of my own kids. These were the moments that made everything worthwhile, knowing that my decision to stand firm had protected not just my property rights, but a community resource that brought joy to dozens of families. That weekend, Emily and her brother James arrived Friday evening, hauling camping gear and fishing equipment from their mother's SUV. They were 17 and 15 now, growing up too fast, but still enthusiastic about spending time at the pond. "Dad, this place looks amazing," Emily said, surveying the walking path and restored vegetation. "I can't believe it was completely drained last year. The restoration company did excellent work. And the HOA's maintenance agreement means they'll help keep it this way." "The same HOA that tried to steal it from you?" James asked skeptically. "Different leadership. Margaret and the new board are actually reasonable. We set up a small tent on a flat area near the water's edge. Technically, we didn't need to camp since my house was right there, but the kids had always loved sleeping under the stars. I fired up the grill while they got the tent situated, and we spent the evening cooking burgers, telling stories, and fishing off the small dock I'd installed the previous month. James caught 3 largemouth bass, all of which we released back into the pond. Emily spent more time taking photos of the sunset and the ducks than actually fishing, but she seemed content. These were the moments I'd fought to preserve, not just property rights in the abstract, but the ability to create memories with my children in a place that had meant so much to my grandfather and now meant so much to me. Later, as the kids settled into their tent and I sat in a camp chair nearby, Emily's head popped out of the tent flap. "Hey, Dad, I'm proud of you for not giving up. I know it was hard." "Thanks, kiddo. That means a lot." "Grandpa Harold would be proud too, I hope so." She disappeared back into the tent, and I heard her and James whispering and laughing about something. I leaned back and looked up at the stars, brighter here on the edge of the desert than they ever were in the city. The Milky Way stretched across the sky like a river of light, and I felt connected to something larger than myself, to my grandfather's memory, to the land he'd preserved, to the future generations who would inherit this small but precious piece of Arizona. The weekend passed too quickly, as time with my kids always did. We fished and hiked and talked about their lives, school, friends, college plans, all the normal concerns of teenagers. We avoided discussing the divorce or the difficulties of split custody, focusing instead on the positive, on what we had rather than what we'd lost. Sunday afternoon, as they packed up to head back to Phoenix, Emily hugged me tightly. "When this place is yours to pass on someday, you should give it to James. He loves fishing more than I do." "Hey," James protested. "Maybe we can share it. You can work that out when the time comes," I said, grateful that such decisions were still decades away. "For now, it's just mine. And you're both welcome here anytime." After they left, the house felt empty. I walked down to the pond and found several people I didn't recognize enjoying the walking path. They nodded politely as they passed, respecting the space without abusing it. This was what I'd wanted from the beginning, the ability to share this beautiful place while maintaining control over my property. The following week brought more good news. The check from the HOA's insurance company arrived, covering nearly $18,000 in legal fees. Marcus had worked efficiently, but defending against a frivolous lawsuit and pursuing criminal charges against Patricia had still required dozens of hours of work. The reimbursement meant I wasn't financially devastated by the experience, though the emotional and time costs could never be fully recovered. I deposited the check and paid off the credit card I'd been using to cover legal expenses. For the first time in a year, I felt financially stable again, no longer wondering if I'd have to drain my savings to defend my property rights. Margaret called that afternoon to invite me to the monthly HOA board meeting. "We're recognizing several community members who've made significant contributions to Saguaro Heights," she explained. "I'd like to acknowledge your cooperation in establishing the pond access agreement. That's not necessary, perhaps not, but I think it's important for the community to see the board working positively with homeowners rather than against them. Will you come?" I agreed, more out of curiosity than any desire for recognition. The meeting was Thursday evening, and I arrived to find a much smaller, more relaxed gathering than the chaos of Patricia's tenure. Maybe 40 people were present, most of them board members or particularly engaged residents. Margaret ran the meeting efficiently, covering standard business landscape maintenance contracts, pool repairs, updated parking regulations before moving to the recognition portion. She called up 3 residents who'd organized community events, thanked them with small plaques, then called my name. William Reeves has shown remarkable patience and cooperation over the past year, Margaret said as I walked to the front. Despite a difficult situation with previous leadership, William worked with the new board to establish an access agreement that benefits everyone while respecting property rights. This is what community cooperation should look like, and we're grateful for his willingness to share his beautiful property with all of us. She handed me a plaque that read, "In appreciation for outstanding community cooperation, William Reeves, Saguaro Heights HOA." The room applauded politely. I said a brief thank you and returned to my seat, feeling awkward but also validated. This public acknowledgement meant that the narrative had finally, officially shifted. I wasn't the villain hoarding community resources. I was a property owner who'd defended his rights while finding a way to benefit the neighborhood. The meeting wrapped up shortly after, and several people approached me to shake hands and express appreciation. Dave was there, grinning broadly. "Look at you, the hero of Saguaro Heights." "Hardly. I just refuse to get pushed around," which is exactly what a hero does. On the drive home, I thought about how dramatically things had changed in just 6 months. From Patricia's harassment and bogus violation notices to standing ovations and appreciation plaques, the transformation was almost surreal. But it also felt right, like the universe correcting itself after a period of chaos. The summer months passed peacefully. Monsoon season brought dramatic afternoon thunderstorms, and the retention pond did exactly what it was designed to do, capturing runoff from the neighborhood streets and preventing flooding. During one particularly heavy storm, I stood on my covered deck and watched the water level rise several feet as drainage pipes emptied into the pond. By the next morning, the level had dropped back to normal, the excess water having percolated into the ground or evaporated in the desert heat. The system worked perfectly, just as it had for decades under my grandfather's stewardship and my own. Patricia's claims about maintenance and flooding risks had been pure fiction, manufactured to justify her attempted takeover. Reality had proven me right on every count. In August, I received a formal letter from the Scottsdale Police Department informing me that Patricia's criminal case had been fully resolved and that all restitution payments had been made. The case was closed. Kenneth Drummond had completed his community service and was reportedly working as a regional manager for a retail chain, keeping well away from HOA politics. Patricia herself had indeed moved to Henderson, Nevada, according to Dave's intelligence network. She'd taken a job with a property management company, ironically. I hoped she'd learned something from the experience, but I wasn't optimistic. People like Patricia rarely admitted fault or changed their behavior. They just found new battlegrounds. But that was no longer my concern. My battleground had been won, and I could finally focus on enjoying my property and my life without constant legal stress. In October, I started dating someone I'd met at a work conference. Her name was Hannah Lloyd, and she was a landscape architect specializing in desert restoration. When I told her about the retention pond and the year-long battle to keep it, she was fascinated. "Can I see it?" she asked over dinner at a Scottsdale steakhouse. "Of course. How about this weekend?" Hannah fell in love with the pond immediately, pointing out native plants I'd never noticed and suggesting small improvements that could enhance the habitat for wildlife. Her professional eye saw possibilities I'd missed, and her enthusiasm was contagious. "You know what would be perfect here," she said, sketching on a napkin during our picnic lunch at the pond's edge. A small educational area with signs identifying the different plant and animal species. It could be a learning resource for kids, like a nature center, smaller scale, but yes, just a few informational plaques along the walking path. I could design them for you if you're interested. I was interested, and I was also increasingly interested in Hannah beyond her professional expertise. She was smart, passionate about her work, and easy to talk to. By the end of that first visit to the pond, I'd asked her out for a second date, and she'd accepted without hesitation. Over the following months, our relationship developed alongside the pond improvements. Hannah designed beautiful educational plaques identifying desert willow, palo verde, and various cacti species. She created a bird identification guide showing the ducks, herons, and occasional migratory species that visited the pond. The HOA board enthusiastically supported the project, funding the plaques as part of their community enhancement budget. The installation happened in early December, just as winter was settling in. The weather was perfect, mid-70s during the day, cooling to the 50s at night. The plaques were installed along the walking path, and Margaret organized a small dedication ceremony. "These educational resources represent the best of what our community can be," Margaret said to the crowd of 50 or so residents who'd gathered. "They're the result of cooperation, creativity, and a shared love for this beautiful piece of desert that William Reeves has generously shared with all of us." Hannah stood next to me, her hand in mine, smiling proudly at her work. The plaques were gorgeous weather-resistant materials with beautiful illustrations and clear, Informative text. Kids were already running from sign to sign, reading aloud and identifying the plants and animals they saw. After the ceremony, Helen approached with her husband, both of them beaming. "This is wonderful," she said. "My grandkids are visiting next week, and they're going to love learning about all the wildlife." "Thank you. And thank you both for your support last year. It meant a lot." Helen patted my arm. "You did the right thing, standing your ground. And look what came from it, something beautiful for everyone." She was right. If I'd caved to Patricia's initial pressure, none of this would exist. The pond would be under HOA control, probably managed by committee with all the bureaucratic inefficiency that implied. There'd be no educational plaques because Patricia had shown no interest in environmental education. There'd be no collaborative spirit because her leadership style had been authoritarian and punitive. By standing firm, by defending my property rights even when it was difficult and expensive and emotionally exhausting, I'd created space for something better to emerge. The retention pond wasn't just a drainage feature or a property line dispute anymore. It was a genuine community asset, managed through voluntary cooperation and mutual respect. As the sun set that December evening, casting golden light across the water and turning the Sonoran desert landscape into something magical, I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. A year and a half ago, I'd been an average divorced guy, quietly living his life and avoiding drama. Then Patricia had marched across my lawn with her clipboard, and everything changed. The battle had been real legal fees, criminal charges, social media attacks, and hundreds of hours of stress. But I'd survived it. More than survived, I'd prevailed in a way that benefited everyone. My property rights were established and respected. The community had access to a beautiful natural area, and I'd found someone special who appreciated what I'd fought to preserve. Hannah squeezed my hand and leaned her head on my shoulder. "You should be proud of what you've created here." "We created it," I corrected. "Those plaques were all your work. I mean the whole thing, the preservation of this land, the stand you took, the collaboration with the new board. You built something that matters." Maybe she was right. Maybe this was about more than just defending property lines and asserting legal rights. Maybe it was about demonstrating that principles matter, that standing up to bullies creates space for better alternatives, that cooperation works better than coercion. My grandfather had preserved this land with his stubborn independence and his refusal to be pressured into selling something precious. I'd defended that legacy with my own stubbornness, my own refusal to be intimidated or manipulated. And now I was building on it, creating new traditions and new possibilities for future generations. The retention pond would outlive me, just as it had outlived my grandfather. Someday my kids would face their own decisions about its future, but they'd do so from a position of strength, with clear precedents and documented rights. They'd know that their father had fought for this place and won, that he'd transformed a conflict into an opportunity, that he'd held the deed and never let anyone forget what that meant. As darkness fell and the crowd dispersed, Hannah and I walked the path one more time, reading the plaques in the glow of the solar-powered pathway lights the HOA had installed. Everything was exactly as it should be: beautiful, functional, shared, and respected. "You know what the best part is?" Hannah said as we completed the loop. "This place tells a story about what's possible when people choose cooperation over conflict. That's rare and valuable. It only happened because Patricia pushed too far and lost, maybe. But you could have responded with equal aggression. You could have banned all access, put up fences, made yourself the villain everyone thought you were. Instead, you stayed measured and reasonable, and you created this." She gestured at the pond, the path, the families still lingering as their kids chased the last light. She was right, of course. The path I'd chosen, defending my rights through legal channels while remaining open to collaboration, had been harder than either extreme. It would have been easier to cave immediately or to respond with scorched earth aggression. But the middle path, the principled path, had produced the best outcome. We walked back to my house hand in hand, and I realized I was happier than I'd been in years. The divorce, the HOA battle, the stress and uncertainty, all of it had led here, to this moment, to this relationship, to this sense of purpose and belonging. The retention pond saga was over, its lessons learned and its conflicts resolved. But the story it told would continue, passed down through neighborhood lore and family history. Future HOA presidents would hear about Patricia's overreach and criminal conviction. Future homeowners would learn about the importance of respecting property rights. Future generations of the Reeves family would know that their ancestor had stood firm when it mattered most. And every time someone walked the path, read the educational plaques, or watch their kids feed the ducks, they'd be participating in a story about cooperation, respect, and the fundamental American principle that a person's property is their own to defend, to share, and to preserve for those who come after. That was my grandfather's legacy, and now it was mine. And someday it would belong to Emily and James, along with the responsibility to protect it, and the freedom to share it. The retention pond would remain in the Reeves family, generation after generation, a small but precious piece of the Sonoran Desert preserved against the endless pressure of development and bureaucracy. I held the deed, and everyone had learned what that meant. But more importantly, I'd shown that holding the deed didn't require being selfish or antisocial. It meant having the authority to make choices about access, about maintenance, about cooperation and sharing. And I'd chosen to share this beautiful place with my community while never surrendering the fundamental right to make that choice. As Hannah and I settled onto my deck with glasses of wine, watching the stars emerge over the dark water, I felt profoundly grateful for everything that had happened. The struggle had been worth it. The principle had been upheld, and the outcome had exceeded anything I could have imagined when Patricia first appeared with her clipboard and her demands. The retention pond was mine, but it belonged to everyone who respected what that meant. And that was exactly how my grandfather would have wanted it.